Thank you, Shiloh, for those incredible words. And I do think there's no more timely moment to start an organization like Free as today. And there is also no better person to launch our public speaker series than Camila Vergara, in my view. Camila is, first of all, a very dear friend. Camila has a PhD in political theory from Columbia University and a postdoc from Columbia Law School, has been a fellow at Cambridge University with Marie Curie, and now is professor at the University of Essex in the business school. She is also the author of this incredible book that you can also find in the back called Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic. The reason why we have Camila here with us is that we are really hoping to gain inspiration from her research on the ground, both in terms of thinkers from the past and current social experiments, for example, like the neighborhood councils in Chile, that she's been very active with, especially during the Constituent process in Chile a few years ago. We're here because her framework can really inspire what we want to do with Free in the first place as a local experiment that has a global resonance. So Camila is also an expert of oligarchy, and oligarchy is a term that we need to profoundly understand given how dramatically timely it is. I just want to mention a few data points that we might not think hard enough about. We have, in the United States, the 1% of the population owning more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. We have over half of American families who are financially insecure. Actually, 44% of full-time workers in the United States are not capable of meeting their basic necessities. And this is actually data from MIT. We have a situation by which in 2024 alone, world's billionaires added 2 trillion to their wealth, 5.7 billion a day, when half of the world population lives with less than $6.85 a day. And of course, we have man-made famines that are now hitting over 500,000 people in Gaza as we speak. This is the face of advanced capitalism and oligarchy. So we need courageous concepts to be able to make sense and not feel, as Shiloh was pointing out, just hopeless and depressed. We need to find the courage to get together and find alternatives. So Camila, to begin, you develop in your research a concept that is crucial, yet usually hidden, especially in public mainstream conversation. And the concept is systemic corruption. How is systemic corruption so crucial to understand what we're seeing in front of our eyes?
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to actually speak about this topic to all of you. It's really an honor to be here. And I'm inspired by you all here and by Clara's energy. She just had a baby only 3 months ago. So this, as a mother, I am just in awe of her brilliance and perseverance. Yes, so thank you for this invitation. And again, I want to talk about systemic corruption as this concept that came about through the analysis of what we call democracy today. So the poem that we heard and this terrible letter of George Washington trying to exterminate people, and such the parallel today with Gaza, right? So is this kind of logic of extermination that is connected to the economy, right? So and people making money off it. So when we think about a democracy, we think about a system in which the people have power. So actually the Greek word means people's power. However, we know today that we are really powerless in our system, right? And not only we don't have power to control the people that we elect, but also the majority of the wealth that is collectively made by all of us, by our labor, is appropriated by a few people. So imagine 90% of the pie goes to a few, 1%. So in a way, how can we have a popular government elected by majority that is supposedly there to serve the majority, allowing for this degree of accumulation of wealth in few hands? Of course, the game is rigged. This is something that we all know, but we cannot really explain what's going on. So part of my understanding is going to how the game was created in the first place. We know that whoever controls the rules controls, the game, right? So in a way, the Constitution itself that we hear in this country is a very sacred text. It came about actually as a way of organizing power and as a way of reproducing the power of the wealthy. Because what happens is that we elect others, but we have no power over them. So there's an illusion of people's power, an illusion of democracy. But what we have now actually is an oligarchic democracy, a system in which a few are elected by the majority, but they don't serve the majority, they serve themselves. So systemic corruption is not talking about the bad apples in the room. We get rid of, the president or whoever is in government and we will be fine. No, the system goes on in a way. It doesn't matter who is in office. The system has a life of its own. Oligarchy reproduces itself. And if we think about, for example, someone has gone to get a loan, the more money that you have, the lower the interest that you are offered. So the more money you have, the easier it is to get a credit. But if you have no money, you pay these outrageous interest rates. And this is how the system is built. So in our democracy, the systems of elections, of how people are not organized at the local level, that you cannot recall your representatives, that you cannot push forward demands, this was by design. And this system that insulates, basically takes away the power of the people and the monitoring of the elites away, this allows for the progressive oligarchization of power, which means basically the accumulation of power in few hands exponentially over time. And today we are at an unprecedented level, because the thing that we know is that the 1% is accumulating 90% of the wealth. However, we're not taking into account tax havens and other places where the rich stash their wealth. So this is the diagnosis, that we need to stop calling democracy, this system that allows for the accumulation of wealth, and the precarity and the dispossession of the many. This is by design, it's not a flaw, it's a feature of the system.
Thank you, Camila. It's so important, right? Because in mainstream discourse, what we hear is that it's actually when the system is not working that there is corruption. Oh, there's why is there such injustice in the world? Oh, it's because people at the top are corrupt. And it's interesting because those economists who study, for example, countries in the global south, exactly use that excuse to explain why those countries are poor. Oh, because their governments are just corrupt. The point here is to say that corruption is not, again, what doesn't work of the system, but as Camila shows in her research, systemically, it is actually a feature of the best possible functioning of this economic system, and how ultimately economic issues are, by definition, constitutively political, because they are encased within constitutions that give this rule of the game that you were discussing. So I think before we get into the constructive part of the conversation, which I think is going to be what we are most interested in hearing here, we want to just briefly reflect on how militarism is a feature of this systemically corrupt oligarchy we exist in. And, just 2 days ago, the UN declared finally, formally, that there is famine in Gaza. And Tom Fletcher, the UN top humanitarian official, wrote words that I think are very eloquent in terms of understanding what oligarchy is about. He says, it is a famine in 2025, a 21st century famine, watched over by drones and the most advanced military technology in history. So this is, I think, a metaphor of what we're discussing here. The unimaginable profits that the destruction of human lives is bringing today. We are at an all-time peak in terms of profit from the military sector. Okay, there's $600 billion is what the top 100 arms corporations make in 1 year. We have, since October 2023, RTX Corporation increased the value of its stocks by 77%. I'm Italian, and we have Leonardo, poor Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo is now the biggest corporation, actually owned by the state, 51% of the shares. So, right, the golden share is actually still owned by the state. Leonardo increased its value by 234% since October 2023. And we know that Francesca Albanese is now under extreme attack because she revealed what, anyway, everyone already knew, which is the whole ecosystem of law firms, consulting firms, universities, tech giants like Alphabet, Amazon, and Microsoft, and asset managers like Vanguard and BlackRock, all speculating heavily on what is the 21st century genocide under our eyes. So this is, I think, extremely important, and I would like your reflections on this connection and how systemic corruption is revealed in times like these, with militarism being so prominent in our economy.
Well, if we think about oligarchy in the history of the world and democracy, this kind of two, if we think about the few and the many being part of society in a way, and some of ruling and the others not, and we see throughout history how oligarchies behave, war is always the kind of means of acquiring more, right? It is the way that they can extract from other places and kind of loot, right? And have all this surplus. So it is a very kind of colonial way of a mode of production, if you will, war. And throughout history, this has been true in a way. All of the republics that were oligarchic republics, they had mercenary armies. And they had to basically pay these mercenaries to go and fight wars. And therefore, where do you get that money? The rich would lend the money, and then the state would be in debt with the rich because they needed to defend themselves and, pay the mercenaries. So it was really something that it was profitable. And this is throughout history. And every time that there's war and there is increased revenue, right, and there is appropriated by a few, and then that is put back into the system to corrupt the system, to create laws that are favorable, to create subsidies that are favorable, right, to push for smaller government in order to have more liquidity, right? All these things that basically are allowed by money, by excess money, right? But money that is just superfluous, that allows for the corruption of democracy further and further. So every time that you have war, republics become more oligarchic and the oppression of the many increases. So today, we see this at the global level. We see that war is really the engine that is driving economic growth. And we see with really, it's very scary in a way. In the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister a few months ago said that now we needed to go into a war economy, and that basically we needed to mimic the economy of the Second World War, and we needed to transform industry into bomb making, and because this is going to allow for more employment. And it is incredible, the parallel, because we are not in the same moment. As Clara was saying, technology plays such a huge role, because even if you have bomb making industry, the amount of people that were going to be employed is very, very low because machines make everything. So technology has allowed for the further extraction and insulation of these companies in terms of having to redistribute any of the money. And therefore, they go to serve the elites that at the end shape the law and regulation, and through lobby, right, and all the PACs and super PACs. This is something that is legal. So the most important thing about systemic corruption and the connection between the state and the war, that this is perfectly legal. The same as slavery is perfectly legal, right? But we have legalized corruption from campaign finance, which was illegal at the beginning of the 20th century, and with Bill Clinton, that legalized lobby. Before that, it was illegal to have influence on politicians. Today, it's perfectly fine, right? So in a way, we have been legalizing our way into these big corporations to really control the government, and we, the people, have no real power and within the system. So again, it's by design.
Thank you. And I think there's no better example than thinking that just at the end of July, our Senate again rejected by large majority a small proposition to stop the sales of arms to Israel of around $500 million, which is symbolic with respect to the amount of money that the United States helps in funding this war. And this is very clear. Why is it that as the Israeli intelligence tells us that more than 80% of the population killed is civilian? Why is it that our people in government that supposedly represent us, and while we know that the majority of the American people are not supporting the killing of children and civilians, why is it that our representatives are literally blocking any attempt to stop a small amount of money from going to the arms, the bombs that then are killing these children? And so I think this is really, really emblematic. But this is nothing new in the sense that if you look at what expert economists were saying after the Second World War, they were explicitly saying, well, war means economic growth. And sure, there's casualties, there's trade-offs, but ultimately, the American economy has always needed wars in order to grow. And this is historically the case. The Great Depression of the 30s was not overcome through Roosevelt, unfortunately, and the New Deal. It was overcome by the Second World War. And there's a lot of historical evidence that tells you that it was actually the war that got the United States out of the Depression. And this is also true after the Second World War, with the war in Korea, the war in Vietnam. Ultimately, what we see in Europe today, which is an insane militarization that is meant to make the economy grow, because of course, there's no more safe profits than those that are guaranteed by the state, right? Because, of course, the money that we give to Israel is money that is coming directly back to American corporations because Israel buys the weapons and the technology from the United States, right? This is what we're talking about, is guaranteed demand to prevent the problem of overproduction in a capitalist economy. And this guaranteed demand is very important once the state is not, in a way, investing in the social sector, because it cannot invest in the social sector because this is politically dangerous for our economic system. We'll have time to discuss this in our next event on austerity specifically, but I do want to mention how ultimately these topics that we will be investigating in this series of 4 events in the fall are all very much connected. And of course, also mass incarceration and ultimately the commodification of land, which are the next 2 topics. Camila, to be in a brighter side, why is it that ultimately what we see today as revelation of this violence helping us move forward? And what can we do to move forward, Camila? What are the tools at our disposal to change this irrational society we exist in?
Well, first of all, this progression of systemic corruption, if we think about, so the idea of, the concept of systemic corruption comes from the ancients. For the ancients, Greeks and Romans, there were not really a separation between physis and nature, like physics and our material body and what we create. So our artificial environments, politics, are also decay as other forms of other organisms in a way. So for them, it was no difference in a way. Everything decays, not because something is artificial that we have created that doesn't only exist in the abstract means that it will be intact. So part of the idea of that regime type or a system in a way, the moment that the good laws are in place, they start degrading. And if we think about from the second law of thermodynamics, if there are any physicists here, the idea is that, when you have energy and heat being, in a body, it just, it breaks all the barriers within until it becomes, indistinguishable with the outside. So there is energy within the systems, and that energy allows for the degradation of the system within, in a way. And this is politics as well. So we have this kind of decay of our system, which at the beginning was not that sharp. So it's really unrecognizable. You are living your life and suddenly it starts getting a little bit more difficult in a way, or just more detached, the political class. But now with with neoliberalism first, so after Reagan, and first it was this neoliberal reforms were applied in Chile, were tried with the barrel of the gun basically, and then in the US and the UK. After that, there is an acceleration of systemic corruption because neoliberalism allows for that retrenchment of the state, to cut the welfare state, to make it small, to cut taxes. So instead of paying 90% taxes, they pay 30 or 20, and therefore it allows for more accumulation of wealth and the more corruption of the system via law and regulation. So it has been a system or a process that is really not, that we cannot see. But then when we have leaders like Donald Trump that come and basically say what everybody was doing anyway, or does it in a more forceful manner, then we see that the game has always been like this. Like, we do not know even if we can go back to what we have in a way, because it's being dismantled and so obviously anti-democratic in a way and anti-constitutional. But we cannot. The system is not working. One of the things is what happened when you have the three branches of government colluding against the people, and this is what we have now. And actually, this was the critique of the Marquis of Condorcet, who was the president of the Constitutional Commission during the French Revolution. This guy basically was looking at the US and say, what you are constructing, politically speaking, with the separation of powers, that is not really, the people is not there, they just elections and they police themselves, this is going to corrupt so fast. Because then if you have collusion, then you really go into that mode. So one of the things that we need to learn from history is that the only remedy for oligarchy and this kind of insulation and accumulation of power in few hands is the power of the people. And I use the term plebeian because plebeians in the Roman Republic were basically the commoners, but the commoners had their own assembly, they had their own representatives, and they passed law. In the history of humanity is where the most robust, in a way, formal power for the commoners vis-a-vis the senators and the elite. So in a way, we need to see that in order to roll back or fight back against oligarchy, it's not only about limiting the power of the wealthy, which is extremely difficult, right? So passing a wealth tax or doing anything at the federal level just seems too difficult in a way, but also building popular power from the ground up. And that is necessarily a local project. It cannot be state, it cannot be national, it needs to be local in the places that we reside, because there is where we have power. So part of what we want to talk now is some forms of empowerment that are able to carve away some part of the control of oligarchy and allows for some kind of autonomy at the local level. So I want to refer to first one of the one of the things that I do in Essex is teach about cooperative management, how people get together and do a collective enterprise that does not only benefit them individually as members, but society as a whole, right? So it's a kind of a social justice enterprise, and how that kind of enterprise actually could be the engine of something much deeper and wider. Because when you have resources and you have people together thinking and trying to make everything better, then magic happens. It's the miracle that the philosopher Hannah Arendt would tell us in a way. Every time that we have people together discussing about the life in common and the forms that we should adopt, in that moment, there's the miracle of humanity in a way. There's spontaneity. There's the probability of a new beginning, okay? So I started working in how to foster communities from the global south, where they have nothing, really no resource, to Europe and the US, where people have more resources and they're able to basically build something. But they're more demobilized because the system is so hostile that it is very difficult to do something concrete. So I have been studying this from the perspective of what do we need to be autonomous? And one of the first things is energy. Without energy, we cannot do anything. So thinking about the source of movement in society, we can call it the energy communities. We can think about neighborhoods that could invest in common infrastructure, solar panels, windmills, biogas, anything that is basically in accordance with the context, right, and where you live. And you can create your own energy. And you not only can create your own energy and lower your, energy, prices in a way for yourself, but also selling to the grid can actually have money to do social projects. And one of these is in Germany is very advanced, and this is when I want to share this story. There's a town called Havelhofen, and this German town. Basically, it's very small. However, they managed to create 100% green energy, and to increase and to put the majority of residents in this collective cooperative. And they, with the excess money that they have been able to accumulate by selling the excess energy to the grid, they have full free transportation for the town and full universal childcare for everyone in the town. So this is part of, this is happening today. It's not known because nobody, is not good for industry in a way. So we need to think about, creating the cells, power cells. If we think about biology, the mitochondria, and this is very interesting. We are hybrid beings. Our mitochondria, our energy in our cells was initially a bacteria that infiltrated the cell, and that became the powerhouse of our cells. So if we can do that in our society, and we can infiltrate society and create power cells within as a kind of a foreign object in this capitalist world, this is something that we can have some money, and in order to bring people together to allow for better welfare, lower prices, but also to extend and do all kinds of projects that we have no money and no infrastructure to do right now, but it's something that we can do from the ground up. So I have more examples, but I want to leave it like that so we can talk more. Thank you.
This is amazing. Yeah, and I also am cautious of time, so we have less than 10 minutes for you and I, and then I would like to open to broader questions. So Camila, can you tell us a little bit about, and Camila has been helping us with the bylaws to draft it collectively, so she knows everything about the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation. How can the free be structured in a way and open up a space here in Tulsa to try really to, as you point, what's the word you use? Infiltrate? Infiltrate into the current economic system we're living here today.
So one of the fallacies when we talk about democracy, we think about everybody equal, everybody somehow self-government. However, the idea that we're all equal obscures the inequalities that actually exist among us in terms of like expertise or, other things are, in consideration. So I think the way that we can think about this hybrid between academia in a way that is very insulated realm, right? They talk to each other and they publish these papers. Actually, the papers the publishers are owners of the papers and very expensive. Some people even have to pay for publishing. It's just absurd. But this is another way of enclosure and extractivism. So if academia is going to really kind of engage in what we call praxis, this idea that we have ideas, in a way, theoretical principles, but we have also principles that are organic, things that come from, the actual practice, the lived experiences of communities. There are basically principles embedded in the practices themselves. And because we practice them, we don't really recognize them as philosophical principles, we just act on them. So I think the role of academia is to actually learn from what is actually happening in the real, because let's be real, academics are not really in the real. They are very insulated, they're elite, the classical armchair philosophical, treatise. If you are going to really do kind of like grassroots work and you think that economics is basically something that is from below and not a theoretical thing that comes from the central bank in a way or something else, then you really need to listen and learn from the practices on the ground. So how to develop a method in a way to allow for co-creation of an agenda. And this is the basis of the free, in a way, the idea that you can, she as the president of the organization will do fundraising, and there will be budget, and this budget will be allocated with a co-created agenda, with, what do you want to know? Or what are the things that are more, pressing? And then that can be taken by academia and theorized. Maybe you want to organize an event that is about a specific issue that you're really worried about or you don't understand. So let's do it in a way. And this is how we can expand, in a way, membership, and we can expand knowledge and knowledge transfer, in a way, from below and from above, and not like academia does it all the time, that we come with some solution basically and say, this is how it is implemented, right? No, it's the other way around. We want to be directed from below and for real, because this is how you do praxis. If not, do something else, in a way. And we are very committed to this, because in a way, it's not only about bringing economics to the people in the sense of this, theoretical or very difficult concepts, but also redefining economics from the ground up, right?
That's very important. Camila, because, Tulsa is really a very interesting place. And again, I'm learning everything because I moved here not very long ago, but I'm trying to learn as much as possible. But, there are very, very huge development plans that come from all the way up, all the way from the oligarchy, from the aluminum plants now, from the big data collection plans. There's so much of this way in which the economy is supposed to be structured that is impacting the livelihoods of people here in Tulsa as we speak. And so how can we go beyond with free of not just having this, which is already amazing, and you will see we'll have all the organizers come and talk to us about how we can get more involved, and we'll have food together, more art. So really to start establishing a community, which is the first piece of this all, is to have a community know each other and know how we can actually act. But apart from these events, how can we think about, for example, breaching this market dependence that is what ultimately ties our hands every day? How can we imagine these spaces of self-sufficiency to be born here in Tulsa? What could be the venue? Should it be food? Should it be energy? Should it be housing? How could the assembly of the free then break up in working groups? And this is a little bit of what we've been discussing with the community, is how can we have working groups that then feel empowered enough to take on projects that can become real about solidarity economy in the making? And again, there's a lot of stuff happening already here in Tulsa. And this is the beauty of what I learned coming to Tulsa, is that the reason why the Che originally and now the free hopefully is successful is because people are hungry, because they're already doing so much in Tulsa. But they are feeling the obstacles and ultimately the division and the separation. It's difficult to create the network. What really screwed over the factory council occupation of Gramsci and his comrades in Italy in 1920, which is the history I've studied in my research, was the incapacity to create a sturdy enough network. Because the Socialist Party and the unions ultimately did not want to give self-management to the workers all the way, and the incapacity to create this network that was binding also with the peasants, for example, not just the industries, and Italy at the time was very agricultural, was what ultimately sounded the death knell of the council movement and the rise of Benito Mussolini, the fascist regime, called in by the bourgeoisie, very terrified by this possibility of the workers, in a way, self-governing, right? The word self-governance is really the death knell of capitalism. Self-governance and capitalism just don't work together. So how is it that we can imagine free as being more than just a space for knowledge? And again, saying that knowledge is built in the making of these spaces for solidarity economy. And what would you do? What would you suggest us doing, first of all?
Yeah, well, what you said before, power is in numbers, and the people are already organized, not in the way that we think they are, but from book clubs to churches to other food banks. People get together and do things collectively, and people don't value their own voluntary service in a way. It's voluntary, it's great, but it's not political or it's not economic. Yes, it is. Like everything is, in a way. Everything is political economic, because politics is about the rules in common, right? The rules that are of the game. So, the markets are not free in a way, they're all regulated, right? So civil society is organized. And what we need to do is put them together in a network, because we cannot have the same approach as the ruling elite has, in the sense that we cannot have one approach and say this is how it is, and we're all going to be democratic now, right? Because we have indigenous peoples, for example, they are in self-government forever in a way. This is how it is naturally organized. Some of them, they don't vote, for example. This is something that I have learned in my Latin American tours, is like they believe in consensus and speaking until basically there's no more to speak about. And, you know, yes, we are hectic times, we don't do that in a way, but that we need to respect that. And we cannot impose voting requirements in assemblies that already do self-governance, for example. So we need to have a network that is diverse enough and flexible enough to be able to accommodate the organizations that already exist on the ground and see how their activity and their view can be seen from an economic perspective in a way, and we can bring it into the free as a hub of the different organizations. Because I can tell you that if we start, crossing, the dots and putting them together, there are going to be projects that can be made very easily. In terms of environment, related to food, they're all integrated. If we think about the energy communities, you can have energy credits in a way of the community. You can spend those credits instead of getting money back, for example. You can get services from your neighbors in a way, and everybody can pitch in with money or with your labor, and you can have plumbing hours, or you can have gardening, whatever, or lawyer hours, and you can offer your labor or money to the membership, and then this is how you create community. So I don't think we need to think it from a strictly political or economic perspective, because then there's not too many. But in a way, civil society is organized, and we need to see it from this perspective, that everything is political and everything touches upon the welfare and flourishing of the community.
Yes, and I think the point is that imagination for what is possible only comes out of the experiment. Free is an experiment. We don't know if it's going to fail tomorrow, who's going to participate. We can't foresee, but the point is that it's through participating that we can have imagination to think forward. So to close, I would like to ask you, what is it from the neighborhood council movement that you followed so closely in Chile, and Camila is Chilean, that we can learn here for free? What is something you think, a couple of wisdoms that you've learned worked or didn't work, and that we could learn from in our future experiment?
Well, first, brief, kind of context for people that don't know. You don't need to know. So in 2000, Chile is the experiment of neoliberalism, basically the cradle of all this, structure of economic extractivism, during the dictatorship of Pinochet, which was backed by the CIA, and the local elite, and basically was there to experiment in a different manner with the economy and provide with these principles and reforms, a constitution was created. So the dictator constitutionalized the regime, basically based on private property. So the state could not do anything. They could not expropriate. They needed to basically always cater to, the people that own the property already. You could not nationalize. There's all kind of limits. A very kind of structured oligarchic constitution. And then Pinochet decided to leave in a way. He was pressured, but the constitution endured. So till today, 2025. Chile has the Pinochet constitution still in place. So in 2019, we had a popular uprising. It was only due as a very small fare increase in the transportation, in the metro, in the capital. And it was just a few cents, but that for the working class, budget, it was a lot. And there was a protest that started with the high school students. And the beautiful thing is that this increase didn't affect them because they had a special pass, but they were protesting because of their parents, working class, and all this. So the elite, of course, the ruling elite said, well, if you don't want to pay the increase of the fare, just wake up earlier. You can take advantage of the early bird at 5 in the morning to save money. And that was so enraging to people already waking up at 4 in the morning to go 2 hours commute. And it was just, people were indignant in a way. And the students started rebelling and basically storming the metro station and saying, evading the fare is another way to fight. And basically this just had like a snowballing effect. And it ended in some metro stations being set ablaze, but nobody knows until today who did it. And if you think about how you're going to burn a metro station, it's all metal. You need some kind of expertise to do that. There were like 20-something of them. So the idea that the people were coordinated and we had like Cuban revolutionaries coming, no, this was like really conspiracy theory. And basically they were just students, just storming and basically bringing the moral soul back to the country. That process ended with the people going into the streets, first demanding better health, better education, all these kind of separate demands. And in 2 weeks, it was all coalesced into the push for a new constitution, because everybody understood that it was not about a reform here and there, about the insurance. No, the system is rigged and we need to make it anew and we want to be protagonists of this. And basically, when this happened, people, imagine you live in a dictatorship, you're not political. Yeah, you don't talk about politics. You can be ratted out by your neighbor and disappear. So people do not trust each other. People don't vote. They're very apathetic. In this moment of the uprising, the media, which is the same as in this country, completely controlled by oligarchy, was basically showing, soccer and, the cat on the tree, whatever. And people knew that, there was all chaos going, things were being set ablaze and you needed the real information. So people went out of their house for the first time to the public square, to the park, and people started gathering spontaneously in a country that's 4,000 kilometers long. There were thousands of territorial assemblies, residence, neighborhood assemblies that spontaneously were born in that moment. So what I have read in the history of revolutions, in which basically people get together and do all these things collectively, it was happening in real time. So that is something that in a country where you didn't have, unions are less than 10%, you don't have really organization. So it's the kind of the worst scenario. You have that degree of organization from one day to the next. People that had never voted before, had never been in a political party or a union or anywhere, they just became the most militant people in the world. And they said, we're going to activate this in a way. And this is something that we can learn, because not because you don't have organization or you feel powerless means that you cannot do it, okay? My role was to allow them to draft constitutional articles about what they cared about. So for example, if you cared about the right to housing, the housing committees of the homeless, basically people that lived with relatives that are waiting for a house, this kind of tenants associations also, they came together and they were organized. How can we really translate what we want into a constitutional article that sounds just so kind of, we cannot do this. We only have like high school, how can we do this? And I was teaching basically that because the Constitution is the foundational document, actually is the most political document of it all. So you need zero expertise to actually create a constitution. You need expertise to interpret it and to create law that derives from that constitution. So the constitutions are principles. You need to know what you want there, and you need to be able to be, concise enough in order not to be ambiguous. And there's an art to it. So people that had no previous education could do this, and they actually had a wholesale right to housing, one of the most progressive rights ever written, just brought wholesale into their constitutional draft. It was a huge triumph. The constitutional draft was defeated because the rules of the voting were changed. Then there was only 28 days to socialize the text. So imagine, to teach the text to others and say how beneficial it is, 28 days. People have other things to do. And then you have the propaganda against how terrible was it, right? So this is a thing of rationality, that you need to bring more spirit to it and be more, you need to understand that the context is very adverse. We thought that just with that right to housing, given that 40% of the population do not have their own house, I thought I'd just drop the mic and go home. I thought that it was going to be approved because we thought the text is there, people can read it. But this is not how it works, right? We work on emotions. So what it was said is that even if you're going to have a house and you're going to you have your right, it's going to be Soviet style. It's going to be like Stalin, basically. And they basically spread fear in a rumor that was baseless. And we thought that it was ridiculous. But it really wrecked everything. So in a way, it was a full of of organization that made it happen. So imagine drafting collectively. It was actually the right to housing was drafted in an underpass in the capital because we didn't have a place to meet. So people just from all over the country met and they designed and then they refined and they did it themselves. So they had skin in the game. It was beautiful. It was, accepted, voted on, everything. So it was a triumph. But then at the end, the system just was too smart in a way, and they have too much money in a way. So we were sidelined, and I thought just the text was going to make it in a way, but it wasn't. So this is something that we need to learn, that we need to have like a more audiovisual, we need to care about social media. We need to care about emotions and spirituality, and not only about logic and numbers, because life is not about that. Life is about meaning in a way. So we need to infuse meaning. We need to create a narrative that works for us and empower us in a myth of power from before, from our hearts, from wherever in a way. But we need to do it, because if not, the oligarchy just has too much power in a way.
And I think this is why it's awesome that here with Free, we are really combining the artistic element with the conversation. And so Shiloh has been, in a way, the leading mind over this, but so many others are ultimately, the artists are part of this collective. The idea that, again, it's logic, it's knowledge, but it has to be transmitted in a way that speaks to people deeply, so that the activation is ultimately organic and holistic in who we are all together. So I'm going to stop here and say the Free is everyone. The Forum for Real Economic Emancipation hopes to really bring collective agency and participation, so not just coming and, anyone can do what they want. You can come and just listen to the talks that we'll have once a month. Again, we will have one a month until December, and we have the calendar. But it's also, if you want to join the assembly and potentially even get elected to the board, that we are figuring out now. So I really hope you and take this as an inspiration to participate daily and continuously in this process of building this experiment here in Tulsa.